This Zero Now program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
I can't be protected by hopes and prayers.
I won't use hope towards what's next. I'll make my own way.
I know impossible is an opinion.
I won't wait for safer schools. I want to create them.
I don't want to be afraid anymore.
I refuse to be a victim.
I'm just one person.
Determined
To bring us back to zero.
I'm just one person.
Determined
To bring us back to zero.
I am just one person.
Determined to bring us back to zero.
Hello, Becky. Thank you so much for joining us today. So your background's a little different from a lot of the people who I've interviewed. You are an architect who specializes in creating safe and engaging learning environments for students. So I never interviewed an architect before. That's pretty cool. So can you start off by telling us a little bit about how you got involved with that line of work?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity for this interview. Any chance to get to be able to kind of talk about this subject and share what I know and also learn from you is always welcome. So thank you. So as a kid, I was always playing with Legos and seeing what I could build. But even more so than that, my parents told me that I was always taking things apart. So just trying to figure out kind of how things worked and the intricacies of them. And so they encouraged me to get into some STEM classes to be able to see what avenues were most interesting. And architecture is where I landed.
Wow, that's awesome. And so what I'm really interested in is, first off, the safety element. But I think the major piece to the puzzle here is integrating safety in a way that also feels welcoming and inviting for students. As I'm sure you know, there's research showing that when you repair abandoned buildings or green vacant lots, you actually see decreases of violence in communities. So the way people feel in a space actually really influences their behavior. So how do you integrate safety, make a school safe in a way that doesn't make it feel like a prison?
It's a fantastic question, and I'm not sure that there's any one given answer that is across the board, like this is what you do to make a place feel safe. I think one thing that's really, really important is understanding the community in which that school is located. So what are the things that are really important to that community? So as an architect, that's something that is really important to me and with the people that I work with is kind of immersing ourselves into both that school community and then that larger community so that we know what those kind of key things are that make them stand out, that really make their school, their community feel like home, and then being able to really draw from that information to be able to make the school environment feel as welcoming as possible. I think a lot of times our knee-jerk reaction when we talk about school safety is just like harden everything, just eliminate windows and put up bars and really make it feel more like a jail or an institution than it is a facility where students need to come to be supported and thrive. So when we think about how we want the perception of the space to be, it wants to be a place that is very inviting, that's well kept, that has this air about it that is showing like, hey, you're welcome here. And not only are you welcome, but you are valued, you're loved, you're respected, and there is a place for you. So I think where this kind of fits in with safety is, one, you feel safe when you enter, and two, you are supported in a way where no student is put on an island. We're creating spaces where you can create community. And it's also thinking about safety in a holistic way and in a preventative manner rather than that knee-jerk reaction of, oh, we need to harden everything, close all the doors, close all the windows, not have that visibility, because a lot of times the visibility is the very thing that you want to create a safe space.
Mm-hmm. So I want to understand a little bit more about the process of getting you on board. So is it kind of like a school will contact you or your company and say, hey, we want to invest X amount of dollars in improving safety? And then what does that conversation look like and where do you go from there?
Sometimes that could happen. A lot of times a school will say, or a school system will say, hey, we really want to do some research as to where we stand with everything. And so they'll ask for professionals, and sometimes they'll choose us, sometimes they'll choose someone else. There's a lot of great companies out there who can do assessments of schools. And we'll go and we'll walk through the schools and we'll have kind of a checklist. And a lot of times we're partnered with another professional that's less on the design side and more on the intensive kind of evaluation of safety in schools, more related to a worst case scenario. But we'll, have that relationship with the school system and have a set of guidelines that we're looking at and working with that partner and do that thorough evaluation and investigation. And I think what's really unique from the design side is that we are looking at how the space is used and what the culture of that space is and what improvements can be made for that as well. Because you mentioned it earlier, place matters, architecture really matters. The spaces that you're actually spending time in, if they're welcoming and inviting, that's going to have a positive reinforcement on the person who is in that space. Whereas if it's not inviting, if it feels enclosed and hard and not welcoming, then that's going to have a negative effect as well. So architecture, a lot of times I think people think it's making pretty buildings, and sometimes, sure, but a lot of times there's a lot more meaning behind what goes into it.
So do you find that you're typically called in a reactive way, meaning after a tragic event occurs, or do you get a lot of proactive districts who are saying we want to take these steps to make these changes before something happens?
So I should clarify that majority of the work that I do and that my firm does is not reactive. It is proactive in the sense that we're creating environments for learning. And in our process, safety is baked into that. So we are not a firm that specializes only in safety or renovation, so bringing it up to a factor of safety. It's really creating learning environments. And when we do that, we're thinking about safety in every aspect.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that has been a common theme in my interviews with people who have worked in technology companies and security companies, and I've never interviewed an architect before, so I'm interested to see if it holds true here, is when it comes to budgeting and allocating resources for these sorts of things, oftentimes schools, A, don't have the money or don't want to spend the money in these areas. And B, when they do, they have a very sort of rigid understanding of what it needs to look like in order for them to get a perceived return. So when you say things to a district like, we're not going to put bars on all of the windows and install metal detectors everywhere and turn this place into a prison, do you ever run into pushback on that? Like, do you feel that it's hard to explain to schools that, hey, actually in creating a welcoming space is preventative of violence?
I do think that there is a responsibility on our part as architects and designers to provide some of that education. People kind of know what they know, and they don't know what they don't know. So it's on me, it's on my colleagues to help inform and educate for the folks that may not know some of the research that's out there. And that's why it's really important for us to stay in this conversation about this research, because as that evolves and as it changes, we want to stay privy to that information and make sure that we are relaying the most up-to-date and accurate information and education for when we have those conversations with clients. So yes, budget is always a challenge, and particularly for a public institution like a school, typically there's not a lot of extra budget. So we have to get pretty innovative with how we are thinking of design, but we also can be very intentional with how we're thinking of design. So if we're thinking about, the entire campus, there are going to be these layers of security and safety that are also just kind of baked into that process. So when we're working with a civil and a landscape engineer, an architect to think about what the actual perimeter of the site is, that's the first line of defense. And we're making sure that we have that visibility that's maintained throughout both the campus and the school building itself.
So are there some common problems that you run into when you go and assess a school? meaning like what are some things that have come up time and time again that you feel like really need to be changed in order to make the space safer, more inclusive, and more engaging?
This is a tough question because again, there's that no right answer, no one right answer for this. But I was having a conversation even just this morning about visibility. So having a place, let's say having a classroom where you can be in a lockdown situation, have that be completely visually secured from the interior, but also have a space that on a normal day when you're not in this potential of a worst case scenario, that is open and inviting and that gives a visual connection, particularly to a teacher in that space, to be able to let their students go out into a collaborative breakout area or a commons area. So if they don't have that opportunity to be able to kind of keep eyes on their students, they're not going to use those spaces. So a lot of times, it kind of started in higher education, but it's really trickling down quite a bit through all K through 12, all grade levels. But having breakout space, common spaces to be able to do more hands-on learning and project-based learning, those are taking place outside of the classroom, and they're largely in open areas. So having that visual cue, having the ability for that teacher to be able to keep eyes on their students while they're using those spaces is critical. But then on the flip side, if you're in this scenario where you need to lock everything down and you want to have visual obstruction, then you need to be able to provide that very quickly.
Yeah, that's very interesting because, I think that, again, just like what we were saying before, there's this idea that the only way to make a place safer is these very, like, draconian measures of massive metal detectors and stuff like that. So when you're talking to a parent or a teacher and they have X amount of dollars to spend and they think that the best way to go about it is stuff like that, what kind of conversation are you going to have with them to maybe bring them over to this way of looking at it?
Well, an open conversation. I think that's the simplest way to say it. We want to always have an open conversation because feelings are always valid. But I learned from someone very smart who recently told me you should make your decisions based off of facts and not off of emotions. So if we can get to a point in a conversation where we're kind of stripping the emotional layer down or out, and we can just look at the facts and the research, then we'll be able to come to a conclusion that will be acceptable on both sides. And maybe that's, meeting somewhere in the middle, because that's where that comfort level really needs to be. And that's also okay. We're making strides in the right direction if we're all listening to each other and learning from each other.
What has the feedback from the students been like? So, like, when you integrate one of these projects, what are some things that you've heard from the kids themselves?
I went to a symposium, this is several years ago at this point, but students realized the importance of having a space that feels inviting, a space that they want to come to. They recognize the fact that, if places have these kind of measures that are implemented that are less friendly, they know it. They know that it's not a place that is welcoming, that's not as inviting or engaging, and ultimately they don't want to come. They don't want to experience that. So I think it is, a lot of times we think of students as kids, all of them, and that's not really a fair assessment because kids of all ages are so smart, and we forget how smart and how in tune with things they are. So I think first giving them that respect of, hey, they know what they're doing, they know what they're talking about, and they should have a say in how their space is designed. We love to get students involved in the design phases of any project that we're working on, whether that's individual interviews with students or it's a survey that comes back and we get to kind of like culminate all of that information and parse through it and see what some overlying themes are with answers. But yeah, we love to include students and get their perspective on everything from design to safety to anything in between.
Mm-hmm. Is there any project that you've worked on that stands out to you as one of your favorites?
Oh, that's like picking your favorite kid. I can't say that, but I mean,
Or
there.
something really unique, maybe, or something like that was just like a little bit unconventional that you aren't expecting to do and you found really worked to your surprise?
I'll speak about that kind of generically because there's kind of a theme in several projects that I've worked on in the past 5 or so years, where um, sites like the location of the building, and I'm talking about new construction for all of these, but the sites of these particular buildings are challenging in the fact that there's a lot of grade. So there's essentially a big slope on the site, and so thinking about how a building will work with the land mass that it needs to be set in is really challenging because it's not just a building going on a flat piece of land, it's a building going on a very sloped site. So what we've been doing on the past few projects is having a building that kind of steps and grades with that site and thinking about accessibility to being able to get outdoors, have an outdoor connection from multiple levels. So because that site is sloping, we're able to use that to our advantage on some of these designs and really say, okay, we're going to be that much more connected with our site because we have a floor that egresses to grade that is actually here and here because we're working with that sloping site. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. That's very cool. So, as part of being an architect, like, would you say that it's more design focused aesthetically, or it's more has more to do with like the actual structure and framework of the building, or is it both? Like, I'm just trying to understand that nuance between an architect and a designer.
Oh, understood. So I'm using those words interchangeably. So as a designer, I would think that's your full design team. So that's not just your architect. That's your architect, all of your engineers, including structural. And structural would really be doing the framing that you're talking about. So designing the actual structure, whether it's concrete or metal or wood, which is not very typical for schools wood construction. But all of those are possibilities. So that would be your structural engineer. And then there's a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, civil, landscape. There's a whole team of designers. So and interior designers, I don't want to leave them out. But architects, our main job, one is to create that inviting space, but also to think about life safety. So we're thinking about codes that are in place and they are written because of and in response to kind of specific things that have happened, like fires. Fires used to be very, very prevalent. And so a lot of the code is written to make sure that everyone can get out of a building safely and efficiently in case of an emergency like a fire. So life safety is equally important, if not more important, than the actual design aesthetics of the space.
Well, Becky, this was a great interview. I learned so much. I just wanted to close out by giving you an opportunity to speak a little bit about a project that you're excited for or where you and your firm are going next, so we could just, get excited about the work that you're doing.
Yeah. So I work for a firm called Clark Nexon, and we do a number of different types of projects. So K-12 is just one of many, but K-12, it really is my passion. I love the educational projects. Like I said before, I can't choose one that I love more than any others because they all have so many great features and feel so invested in each of the communities that we're in. I am really excited about one that's in design right now where we've got a lot of connection that's happening between multiple stories and how to kind of overcome some of the challenges of making those spaces be both very welcoming and inclusive, but also feel very safe, both for students and teachers and parents who are sending their kids to school every day. So I love the work that I do and the people that I work with and the organizations that I'm associated with. So thank you, Zero Now, for all of the work that you are doing for prevention of these worst case scenarios. I'm happy to be a part of this group.
Becky, we're so happy to have you. Welcome to Zero Now, and thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview with me today.
Absolutely.